My name is Linden Ashford, and for 23 years, my family believed I'd quit. Quit West Point. Quit discipline. Quit ambition. In their eyes, I had stepped away from the family legacy and into mediocrity. They never asked what I'd done instead. They never really wanted to know. At every holiday dinner, my younger sister Corinne's military promotions were toasted with the same pride they used to reserve for my father's retirement plaques. Meanwhile, I brought dessert. Store-bought. Because no one ever asked me to contribute more. Once, my cousin leaned in and whispered, "It's so sweet you still come around." I'd just come back from a classified diplomatic assignment in Ankara. But to them, I was the failure with good manners. When I turned 35, I stopped hoping they'd see me. When I turned 40, I stopped seeing them. And yet, last month, I showed up to Corinne's promotion ceremony. Out of courtesy? No. I came to see if they would still pretend I was no one. I wore a soft blouse and slacks, civilian enough to blend in, quiet enough to disappear. But I didn't disappear. Halfway through the briefing, a senior commander walked in. General Merrill. His gaze swept the room and landed on me. He stiffened, paused, then saluted. "Ma'am," he said, clear and formal. "General Advisor Ashford, it's an honor." And just like that, the room turned silent. Not for Corinne, not for my father, for me. I was born in Colorado Springs, in a house where rank came before warmth and silence stood in for approval. My father, Everett Ashford, retired as a lieutenant colonel in the Army Signal Corps. My mother, Lenore, was a field medic turned clinical instructor who raised us with triage discipline. Handle the bleeding first, feelings later. Our lives rotated around Fort Carson like moons orbiting a cold star. At the dinner table, we spoke in acronyms, ROTC, MOS, OPSEC, like other families spoke about school plays or birthdays. From the moment I could walk, I was expected to stand straight and earn my place in the Ashford lineage. At 18, I entered West Point. That alone should have made them proud, but pride, in my family, had a price tag, visibility. You had to win publicly, wear your medals, post the photos. When I left after my first year without a word or a diploma, they assumed I had cracked under pressure. None of them asked why. The truth was never mine to tell. I hadn't failed. I had been recruited, quietly and off the record, into a joint strategic program that operated outside official ranks. It was the kind of clearance that didn't come with a ceremony. You signed a document, disappeared into training, and re-emerged with an alias, a task, and no expiration date. I'd become part of the Joint Strategic Analysis Program, JSAP, technically civilian, functionally equivalent to military intelligence. My job was to model risks before they turned into wars, to build defense frameworks 2 steps ahead of conventional policy. Every victory I had was invisible, because it was supposed to be. My parents never knew. They assumed I ended up in some admin desk job. Once, at a family gathering, my father said to an old friend, "Corinne's doing real work. Boots on the ground. Linden, well, she's in Washington somewhere. Makes nice PowerPoints, I think." I stood 10 feet away and didn't correct him. What would I say? That his daughter had advised NATO command on post-conflict stabilization in Georgia? That she'd signed off on a disinformation redirection op that kept an Allied convoy from being targeted? The walls in that house didn't echo with truth. They only amplified what people wanted to hear. Corinne, 5 years younger, had always been the star. She had the brass-polished version of the career I never got to display. Commissioned with honors, deployed, promoted on schedule, and good at it too. Poised, photogenic, disciplined. She made it easy for them to forget me. Over the years, I sent gifts, birthday flowers for my mother, bourbon for my father, a college fund contribution for Corinne's daughter. None were acknowledged. A cousin once slipped and told me that my name wasn't spoken anymore because it made Mom uncomfortable. That same cousin also sent me a photo once, family reunion at our old cabin. I'd been in the original shot. In the version she sent, I had been cropped out. "To balance the frame," she said. I kept the original. Not because it hurt, but because it reminded me of the precise moment I became a ghost. Still, I watched from afar. I knew when Corinne made captain. I watched the DVID's release when she gave a morale speech to her unit in Djibouti. I even recognized a phrase in her speech, one I had coined in a strategy memo 2 years prior. She didn't know I'd hear it, or maybe she did and didn't care. I never stopped serving. I just stopped going home. Until the call came. It was mid-October. The sky in D.C. was brittle with dry wind and orange leaves. I'd just wrapped a joint consultation with Defense Simulation Command when my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in years. Mom. I stared at it for 3 full rings before answering. Her voice was as clipped as ever. Corinne's being promoted next week. Lieutenant Colonel. Ceremonies at Fort Carson. You should come. There was a pause. No? How are you? No. It would mean a lot. Just, don't wear anything weird, and don't make it about you. I said, I'll be there. I didn't go for closure. I went to test something quieter, whether I could walk into that house, take up space, and no longer flinch from the sound of my own name. That night, I opened the closet. Folded at the back, still crisp with dry cleaner plastic, was the uniform I'd never worn publicly. Not military issue. Ours were different. Sleeker, no insignias, coded by function. I didn't pack it. Instead, I chose a charcoal gray blouse, pressed slacks, low heels. Civilian, like they thought I was. Let them see what they'd erased. On the drive, I didn't rehearse anything. No speech, no confrontation. Just silence and open road. I arrived an hour before dinner. No one greeted me. The front porch was swept clean. The flag hung as it always had. I knocked, then let myself in. My mother was arranging name cards at the table. Without looking up, she said, "Change your shirt. You're seated next to Corinne. Just don't interrupt anything tomorrow." Not hello, not welcome home. Just orders, like I'd never left. The dining room hadn't changed. Same wood-paneled walls, same brass-framed photo of Corinne receiving her captain's pin, centered above the fireplace. My father appeared moments later in his usual pressed polo and regulation haircut, despite being retired. He gave me a firm nod, a back pat that felt more like a shove into compliance. "You made it," he said, his eyes already skimming past me to the room beyond. No smile, no questions. Just confirmation of presence, like checking a name off a manifest. The pre-ceremony dinner wasn't large. Family, a few close colleagues of Corinne's, and one lieutenant I vaguely remembered from a Christmas card. I was seated at the far end of the table, next to a neighbor who kept calling me Lauren. I didn't correct her. Corinne made her entrance like a homecoming queen in dress blues. Her uniform was immaculate, bars gleaming, every ribbon meticulously placed. She floated from guest to guest, kissing cheeks, accepting compliments, with an effortless laugh that sounded rehearsed. She was the kind of officer the press liked to photograph. Accessible, composed, branded for PR. When she reached my end of the table, she gestured at me lightly with a manicured hand. "This is my sister," she said. "She started at West Point, but then pivoted. She works in administration now, I think. DC something or other." A polite laugh rippled down the table. I caught it mid-throat and swallowed it whole. The neighbor leaned in again. "That's still nice, though," she said. "Better than nothing." "Better than nothing." I smiled with my lips only. "Sure," I replied, then took another bite of the custard dessert they'd served cold in little glass cups. Sweet, bland, anonymous. Like most things meant to please without standing out. My father raised a toast to Corinne's promotion. To service, to discipline, and to daughters who follow through. I lifted my glass. I didn't sip. When the plates were cleared, Corinne stood to make a short pre-speech. She tapped her fork against her glass, just lightly enough to call attention without seeming arrogant. "I've been reflecting," she said, "on how the military taught me that walking away isn't always strength. Sometimes it's surrender." There were nods, some chuckles. One uncle clapped softly. The message wasn't subtle. It was a warning shot dressed as insight, and it had my name carved under the surface. I said nothing. I've found over the years that silence, when worn properly, becomes armor. After dinner, as guests mingled near the hallway portraits, I wandered into the den. The walls were still a shrine to legacy. framed prints of my father's unit in Germany, Corinne, in her first set of fatigues, beaming under a desert sky, even my mother, young and lean, bandaging a soldier's leg in some vintage black and white Polaroid. Not a single photo of me after 2002. One frame even had a clear space where I remembered standing. I knew the original image. I still had a copy. I'd been edited out. To center the shot, someone once told me. I didn't blame them. Ghosts aren't supposed to clutter the background. Outside, the wind had picked up. I stepped onto the porch, letting the door close behind me without sound. The air was cool, dry. Somewhere beyond the trees, a brass band was rehearsing, sharp notes trailing off into silence like unfinished thoughts. I sat on the top step, elbows on my knees, watching the neighborhood streetlights blink on one by one. Behind me, the windows glowed yellow with laughter I'd never been invited to share. Tomorrow, I would sit quietly. I would let Corinne shine. I'd clap in the right places. I'd disappear when expected. But there was something neither she nor anyone else knew. The truth doesn't need an invitation to arrive. It shows up, unannounced, and waits patiently for the room to stop talking. The auditorium at Fort Carson was a cathedral of brass and order. Flags lined the walls, folding chairs arranged in perfect rows. Each seat was labeled with rank and relation: family assigned, family unassigned, distinguished guests. I was placed 3 rows from the back, between a junior officer's wife and someone's teenage niece, who kept scrolling through Instagram under the program booklet. Corinne stood at the podium in full dress uniform, posture rigid and rehearsed. Her hair was tucked neatly, her boots mirrored to perfection. She looked every inch the rising officer, and she knew it. The speech was polished. She spoke of duty, of loyalty, of sacrifice. Then came the barbed line, delivered with calculated softness. And in our careers, we learn to recognize who truly honors the uniform and who walked away from it. I felt no need to flinch. The words didn't surprise me. I had lived beneath them for decades. But then, just as she turned the page of her note cards, the auditorium door creaked open. A quiet hush swept through the room. A man in dark uniform entered, tall, silver-haired, bearing the kind of stillness that makes others straighten without realizing it, General Nathaniel Merrill. His presence shifted the air before he even spoke. He scanned the rows with a practiced glance, and then stopped on me. His back straightened further. He walked, unhurried but deliberate, down the aisle. His boots struck the floor with a precision that carved silence in their wake. When he reached my row, he paused. Then, in full view of the audience, he raised his hand and offered a crisp, formal salute. "Ma'am," he said, loud enough to carry, "General Advisor Ashford. It's an honor to see you again." The room didn't just quiet. It froze. Corinne's voice faltered. The next note card trembled in her hand. My mother, seated up front, dropped her water glass. The sharp crack echoed like a rifle report. My father stood halfway, then slowly sat down, his face unreadable. Around me, heads turned. Whispers bloomed like startled birds. Did he say General Advisor? Is that her? I thought she left after West Point. I stood, slowly, not for applause, but out of respect. I returned the salute. "General Merrill," I replied, voice steady. "Always a privilege." From the corner of my eye, I saw a captain in the front row lean toward his CO and whisper, "That's the one from the Estonia drills. I thought she was just a myth." Corinne tried to continue. Her mouth moved. Her eyes darted. But the rhythm was broken. The spotlight had shifted. Unintentionally, undeniably. For the first time in that room, people were no longer watching her. They were watching me. The ceremony ended not with a standing ovation, but with a polite, confused ripple of applause. The kind you give when you're not sure who just won something. Outside the hall, as people gathered for photos and congratulations, I stood near the side exit, hands folded. Corinne found me quickly. Her heels clicked against the concrete with more force than grace. "You let me go up there like that?" she hissed. I met her eyes. "Like what?" Like a fool. You said nothing. You made me look like... I made you look like exactly what you are, I said evenly. And you made it clear what you thought I was. I simply stood still. The truth moved. Her jaw tightened. She blinked rapidly, her voice thinner now. Was that the plan? Humiliate me? Take my moment? If your truth only exists when I'm silent, I said, then it was never yours to begin with. I didn't wait for her response. I turned and walked away, my steps unhurried, my hands steady. Behind me, I felt the weight of a room trying to reassign its assumptions, still sorting through which version of me to believe. Let them struggle. They had spent 20 years writing me out of the story. It was only fair they take a moment to reread the ending. That night, I returned to the base guest quarters. Standard government beige, stiff linens, and a lamp that buzzed faintly when turned on. On the desk sat a manila envelope. No name, no seal. Just there, waiting. Inside was a printed scan of an anonymous email, time-stamped 2 years prior. It accused a L. Ashford of authorizing an off-books operation in Yemen that had led to civilian casualties. The language was precise, too precise. I recognized the phrasing, nearly word for word, from a classified after-action report I'd once reviewed in Brussels. That report had only passed through 3 people. One of them was Corinne. My fingers went cold. At the time of the email, I had been pulled into a brief internal audit. Nothing stuck. The system chalked it up to anomaly detection. But now, holding the evidence, I saw the smoke hadn't vanished. It had been left to simmer. Later that evening, I found Corinne outside the officers' club, phone in hand, wine glass in the other. I didn't raise my voice. I simply held up the page. "Did you send this?" She stared. Her eyes locked onto the lines like they might disappear. Then quiet. "Yes." "Why?" Her smile dropped. She exhaled. "Because you weren't supposed to win." I said nothing. She kept going, voice cracking now. "You left. You vanished. And still, they talked about you, even when you weren't there. I did everything right, and I was still second." Her words weren't cruel. They were fractured, familiar. I nodded once. "You do realize leaking intel is a federal offense." "I didn't mean to leak intel, just doubt." I looked at her, my sister, my shadow. "You planted it in me long ago. I just never let it grow." The next morning, I filed a request to lead the internal investigation into the breach. It wasn't protocol, but I still held reserve clearance under JSAP. More importantly, I had a reason no one else did. This time, the fire had started in my house. General Merrill approved it without hesitation. "Clean it up," he said, "and don't hold back." The task force was small. Me, 2 cybersecurity officers, and 3 people I never imagined I'd work with again. My father, my mother, and Corinne. My father reviewed legacy comms data. His post-retirement access was still valid. My mother assisted with forensics. Her old medic's attention to detail now turned to metadata. Corinne was assigned to scan system vulnerabilities, an uncomfortable symmetry given the email she'd once sent. The room was cold, conversations clipped, eyes averted. But we worked. 3 days in, our AI flagged a dormant Trojan embedded in a 2017 logistics archive. It had never been activated until someone accessed it through a back-channel server. That someone, the records showed, had used Corinne's credentials 2 nights before the promotion ceremony. She hadn't meant to set it off, but recklessness had consequences. When I confronted her, she didn't deny it. "I just wanted to pull the curtain back," she said. "I didn't know there were bombs behind it." I didn't lecture, I didn't gloat. I simply said, "You lit the match, but I'll put out the fire." She nodded, eyes lowered. That evening, I reviewed the final system patch. The breach was sealed, but some wounds take longer. 2 weeks later, I stood behind the podium at a regional strategy summit in D.C. No rank on my collar, just a nameplate that read Linden Ashford, Senior Advisor, JSAP. My presentation was on asymmetric conflict modeling, but I ended with a story, one I'd never told in public. About a night in Aleppo, a choice that saved a village but cost me a medal. "I made the call," I said, "because there were children inside, and I'd do it again." In the second row, Corinne sat in full uniform. She didn't blink, didn't shift. When I stepped down, I handed her the mic. She cleared her throat. I once believed visibility meant value, but I've learned some of the strongest among us are the ones we never see coming. That night, our family took a new photo, this time with everyone in the frame. No edits, no cropping. Later, Corinne handed me a cake in a plain box. Chocolate with simple blue lettering. Sister, leader, ghost no more. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a visitor in my own name.